Welcome, curious minds. Have you ever wondered whether the biblical account of the Great Flood could have roots in a real historical event? Most of us, when hearing the word flood, immediately picture heavy rain pouring from stormy skies, a vast, submerged world, and a wooden ark bobbing on the water's surface, home to pairs of every animal species on Earth. This imagery, deeply ingrained in the Western imagination, stems largely from the influence of the Judeo-Christian narrative, which has been endlessly adapted in books, films, and television. Yet, what many don't realize is that stories of massive floods are not unique to the Bible. Similar myths have surfaced in the ancient traditions of peoples across the globe, from the Mayans and Incas to the Mapuche, the Nahuas, and many other indigenous American cultures. It raises a fascinating question. Could all these civilizations, isolated by geography and time, be recalling the same event? Or are they separate accounts of catastrophic floods experienced locally and passed down through generations? As we explore these flood myths from cultures around the world, we'll investigate whether there's a unifying truth behind them or if they're independent echoes of humanity's ongoing struggle with nature's fury. To begin, let's examine the most famous version, the story of Noah and the Ark, found in the book of Genesis. According to the book of Genesis, chapter 6, God became disillusioned with humanity after witnessing the widespread corruption and violence that had overtaken the earth. Deeply saddened by what creation had become, he decided to wipe the slate clean. In verse 7, God declares, "I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them." However, there was one exception, Noah. Unlike the rest, Noah had lived a righteous life, and for that, he was chosen to survive. God instructed him to build a massive ark from resinous wood, sealed with pitch, measuring 300 cubits in length, 50 in width, and 30 in height, roughly 150 meters long, 25 meters wide, and 15 meters high. Into this ark, Noah was to bring his family, his wife, sons, and their wives, as well as pairs of every living creature, male and female. God also told him to gather and store enough food for them all to survive. What is less commonly known is that Noah was commanded not just to bring a single pair of each animal, but, as written in Genesis 7 verse 2, to take 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, and only 1 pair of each unclean kind. Clean animals, as later defined in Deuteronomy 14, included cloven-hoofed, cud-chewing animals such as oxen, sheep, goats, deer, and antelope, considered fit for consumption. This means the ark carried multiple pairs of some species, especially those designated for later sacrifice or food. Noah followed God's instructions meticulously. According to the biblical timeline, the flood began in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month. That day, as Genesis 7 describes, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Torrential rains fell for 40 days and 40 nights, and the rising waters swallowed everything in their path. The floodwaters grew so high that even the mountain peaks disappeared beneath them, submerged by over 7 meters. Every living thing that moved on dry land perished. Humans, animals, and birds alike. Only Noah, his family, and the creatures aboard the ark were spared. The account continues in chapter 8, where it's said that after 150 days, God remembered Noah and those with him. A powerful wind swept across the earth, and the floodwaters began to recede. The subterranean springs were sealed, the rain ceased, and the water levels slowly dropped. Eventually, on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Over time, the peaks of the mountains re-emerged and hope returned. By the way, if you've made it this far, it means you're as passionate about uncovering forgotten truths as we are. Our channel is currently aiming to reach 1,000 subscribers by June 30th. If you'd like to support this journey of exploration and historical discovery, consider subscribing. It really helps us keep producing content like this. 40 days later, Noah opened a window in the ark and released a raven, which flew back and forth until the waters had dried. Then he released a dove to check if the water had receded further, but the bird found no place to land and returned to him. 7 days later, he tried again. This time, the dove came back at dusk, carrying a freshly plucked olive leaf in its beak, a symbol that dry land was once again within reach. After another week, Noah released the dove once more, and it didn't return. The earth was becoming habitable again. In the 601st year of Noah's life, on the first day of the first month, he removed the ark's covering and saw that the ground was dry. Yet it wasn't until the 27th day of the second month that the earth was fully restored. Finally, God gave Noah the command to leave the ark. He and his family stepped onto dry land once again, releasing the animals to repopulate the world. As a gesture of gratitude, Noah built an altar and sacrificed one of each clean animal and bird. Pleased with the offering, God promised never to destroy the earth with a flood again. As a sign of this eternal covenant, he placed a rainbow in the sky, a reminder of his vow between himself, Noah, and all living beings on earth. The biblical story of the Great Flood, as described in Genesis, forms part of the Torah, the foundational text of Judaism. Specifically, it belongs to the Pentateuch, a collection of 5 books traditionally attributed to Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These books also constitute the opening section of the Christian Old Testament, meaning both Jews and Christians share the same narrative regarding the flood. In Islam, a similar account appears in the Quran, where the prophet Nuh, Arabic for Noah, is warned by Allah of an impending deluge meant to punish a disobedient people. While the Quran doesn't present the flood as a worldwide catastrophe, it still serves the same symbolic function, a divine judgment upon moral failure. In Surah 54, verses 11 and 12, the flood is described vividly. So we opened the gates of the sky with pouring water and caused the earth to gush forth with springs. So the waters met for a matter already predestined. Allah instructed Nuh to build a vessel, but the Quranic version provides fewer technical details than the Bible. What stands out is the emotional intensity, Nuh's pleas, the scorn of his people, and his deep sorrow when even one of his sons chooses not to join him on the ark and is ultimately swept away by the waves. The I message, though clothed in different traditions, is universal: obedience, faith, and survival in the face of divine retribution. Interestingly, the Quran also expands on who was saved. In addition to Nuh, his family, and a pair from each species, a few believers who accepted his warning also boarded the ark, though the text emphasizes that they were very few. Unlike the Bible, the Quran doesn't portray the ark as a colossal ship with precise dimensions, nor does it mention the mountain of Ararat. Instead, it focuses on the moral and spiritual dimensions of the story. Over time, many unverified claims have surfaced, suggesting that remnants of Noah's Ark have been found on or near Mount Ararat in present-day Turkey. Some even point to the Durupinar site, located roughly 29 kilometers from Ararat, claiming its unusual shape proves the Ark's existence. However, most archaeologists argue that the formation is natural, not man-made. Despite these controversies, the enduring fascination with the flood story across 3 major world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, reveals its deep psychological and cultural impact. It prompts a question that extends beyond Scripture. Could these myths, retold across millennia, stem from a single historical event, or are they independent reflections of local disasters, embedded with moral lessons by ancient peoples seeking to explain the chaos of nature? To explore the origins of the flood story, scholars have long turned their attention to the Torah, which predates the Quran and is considered a cornerstone of ancient Jewish religious literature. Most historians agree that the Torah was compiled around the 6th century BCE, during the Babylonian exile following King Nebuchadnezzar II's conquest of Jerusalem. It's believed that the Torah is not a wholly original work conceived during that period, but rather a compilation of older oral and written traditions passed down over generations. This idea doesn't necessarily conflict with religious beliefs, as oral transmission of sacred stories was a common practice in the ancient world. While there's no concrete archaeological evidence confirming Moses's existence, neither is there definitive proof disproving it. According to Jewish and Christian chronologies, Moses would have lived around the 14th or 13th century BCE, a time from which very few personal records survive unless the individuals were rulers or builders of monumental architecture. Therefore, while scholars generally consider Moses a mythical or symbolic figure, they don't dismiss the possibility that he might have been a real person whose teachings were preserved and compiled centuries later. This context sets the stage for deeper inquiry into the roots of the flood story. If it wasn't original to Moses and the Torah, where did it come from? The answer may lie in even older sources, particularly in the texts of ancient Mesopotamia. Long before the Torah was compiled, civilizations such as the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians flourished between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These peoples not only developed some of the world's earliest cities and systems of governance, but also invented cuneiform writing, the first known method of recording language. Initially used for documenting economic transactions, cuneiform evolved to preserve hymns, proverbs, rituals, and stories, mythological and historical alike. Among these writings, one epic stands out, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This literary masterpiece, believed to have originated around 2100 BCE from a series of 5 independent Sumerian poems, eventually took form as a unified Akkadian version by the 18th century BCE. Within this epic, the story of a great flood is told through the character of Utnapishtim, a man who survived a divine deluge after receiving a warning from the god Ea. The parallels to the biblical account are striking: a divine command to build a boat, detailed specifications for its construction, the preservation of life through animals and family, and the eventual release of birds to test for dry land. These resemblances have led many scholars to argue that the Genesis flood story may have been heavily influenced by, or even directly borrowed from, Mesopotamian traditions. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the flood narrative emerges during a profound existential journey. After the death of his close friend Enkidu, Gilgamesh becomes overwhelmed by grief and the realization of his own mortality. Determined to escape death, he sets out to find Utnapishtim, a man who, along with his wife, was granted immortality by the gods after surviving a catastrophic flood. With the help of a boatman named Urshanabi, Gilgamesh reaches Utnapishtim and implores him to reveal the secret of eternal life. Initially skeptical, Utnapishtim warns Gilgamesh that immortality is not meant for mortals, and that striving to defy fate can rob life of its meaning. Nonetheless, he agrees to share the story of the flood that changed everything. In his account, the god Enlil had grown angry with humanity and resolved to wipe it out with a deluge. But Ea, the god of wisdom and water, intervened. Speaking to Utnapishtim through a dream, Ea instructed him to build a large, sealed vessel, providing exact measurements and urging him to bring his family, craftsmen, and all the animals of the field. As the storm began, the heavens raged, the earth shook, and even the gods themselves fled in terror. It rained for 6 days and 7 nights, and when silence finally returned, all of humankind had turned to clay. Utnapishtim's vessel eventually came to rest atop a mountain, and much like in the biblical story, he released a series of birds to determine whether the waters had receded. First a dove, then a swallow, and finally a raven. The raven did not return, signaling that dry land was once again accessible. When he opened the boat and freed its occupants, Utnapishtim offered a sacrifice to the gods. Attracted by the aroma, the gods gathered around, and Enlil, who had ordered the destruction, was scolded by the other deities for his extreme punishment. As a gesture of reconciliation, Enlil granted Utnapishtim and his wife eternal life, making them exceptions among mortals. This tale, while unique in its setting and pantheon, mirrors the structure and moral themes of Noah's flood. Both narratives portray a divine warning, a chosen survivor, the preservation of life, and a return to a renewed earth. And notably, both stories end with a divine promise or gift. These striking similarities raise compelling questions. Were these stories derived from a shared memory of a prehistoric disaster, or did they evolve independently as metaphorical expressions of rebirth after devastation? Regardless, the flood motif seems to resonate deeply within the human psyche, recurring in cultures far beyond the Mesopotamian valley. If you're enjoying these fascinating parallels between ancient cultures and want to keep exploring more stories like this, a quick like or follow goes a long way. It lets us know you value this kind of deep, well-researched content and encourages us to keep going. Outside of Mesopotamia, we find other ancient civilizations with remarkably similar flood narratives. In ancient Persia, the sacred texts of Zoroastrianism, particularly the Avesta, tell of a great climatic catastrophe. In one such story, the hero Yima is forewarned by the god Ahura Mazda about an impending disaster, a deadly winter that would blanket the world in snow and make survival impossible. Unlike the torrential floods of other myths, this was a freezing deluge, an ice age of divine origin. To survive, Yima was instructed to dig a vast subterranean refuge where a select group of humans and specimens of animals and plants could take shelter. This massive underground complex acted as a kind of ark, not on water, but under the earth. Yima's efforts saved life from extinction, and after the catastrophe passed, those sheltered beings emerged to repopulate the world. The underlying pattern remains consistent: a warning from a deity, the construction of a vessel or shelter, the selection of survivors, and a return to life. These core elements reappear again and again in cultures spread across time and geography, suggesting that either humanity once shared a common traumatic memory or that these archetypes fulfill deep psychological and cultural needs. India also contributes a striking variation to the flood myth through ancient texts such as the Shatapatha Brahmana and the Mahabharata, both composed around the 6th century BCE. These writings recount the tale of Manu, the first man, who was saved from a great flood by a divine fish named Matsya. The story begins when Manu discovers a small fish in the water used for his daily rituals. The fish begs him not to return it to the river, fearing it will be eaten by larger fish. Moved by compassion, Manu places it in a jar. As the fish grows rapidly, he transfers it to increasingly larger containers until eventually releasing it into the ocean. There, the fish reveals its divine nature and warns Manu of a coming flood that will destroy all life. Matsya instructs Manu to build a boat, and when the waters arrive, the giant fish tows Manu's vessel to safety by a horn on its head. In some versions, Matsya is considered an avatar of the god Vishnu, sent to protect life. Manu is the only human to survive, and from him, a new human lineage begins. This story, rich in symbolism and layered with spiritual meaning, echoes the universal structure of flood myths: divine communication, salvation through preparation, destruction, and eventual rebirth. Remarkably, even specific motifs like the release of birds or mountain landings surface again and again, transcending cultural boundaries. The Greeks, too, had their own flood stories, and some of them bear uncanny resemblance to Near Eastern myths. According to ancient Greek sources, particularly the writings of Xenophon in the 4th century BCE, there were said to be 5 major floods, though none were described as fully global. The most famous and most relevant for comparison is the flood during the age of Deucalion and Pyrrha. In this tale, Zeus, angered by the wickedness of mankind during the Bronze Age, decided to destroy the human race. Prometheus, the titan who gave fire to humanity, warned his mortal son Deucalion about the impending deluge. Deucalion built a wooden chest or ark, which he entered with his wife, Pyrrha. The rains fell for 9 days and nights, flooding much of Greece. When the waters receded, the couple found themselves atop Mount Parnassus. In a gesture of reverence and gratitude, they offered sacrifices to Zeus. The parallels with the Noah story are remarkable. Divine wrath, a chosen survivor, an ark, a mountain landing, and a ritual offering. Yet the Greek version includes a unique detail, the method of repopulating the earth. Following the instructions of the oracle of Themis, Deucalion and Pyrrha were told to throw the bones of their mother over their shoulders. Interpreting this as a metaphor, they cast stones, bones of Gaia, the earth, which transformed into men and women, respectively. This symbolic rebirth through the earth's own material added a poetic twist to the flood myth. As we move beyond the Mediterranean world and into East Asia, we encounter yet another layer of flood mythology in ancient Chinese traditions. Unlike the morally charged versions of the West, many Chinese flood myths frame the deluge not as divine punishment, but as the result of cosmic imbalance. In works like the Shanhai Jing, Liezi, and Hawainanzi, stories are told of Gong Gong, a powerful deity associated with water, who in a moment of rage or battle struck one of the celestial pillars supporting the heavens. This act tilted the sky and cracked the earth, causing floods to engulf the world. The chaos that followed was cataclysmic. Wild beasts roamed freely, birds of prey hunted the elderly and children, and humanity teetered on the edge of extinction. Enter Nuwa, a serpentine goddess credited with creating humankind from yellow clay. She responded to the crisis by melting stones of 5 colors to repair the sky, and by severing the legs of a giant turtle to replace the damaged celestial pillar. Her heroic efforts restored order, though the world never fully returned to its original state. This, according to myth, is why rivers flow east and the sun sets west, because the heavens remain tilted. While not centered on an ark or specific survivor, the Chinese narrative still reflects the same essential themes: destruction through water, divine intervention, and the restoration of life. Even without a boat, the flood serves as a mythic reset button for human civilization. Crossing the Pacific to the Americas, we find a rich tapestry of flood stories among the indigenous peoples of North, Central, and South America. Among the Cheyenne of the Great Plains, an ancient oral tradition tells of a catastrophic flood that drastically changed the course of their history, believed by some to have taken place in the Missouri River Valley. The Blackfoot people share a narrative known as the language on a mountain, in which Napi, the old man and creator figure, watches as a massive flood submerges the earth. Survivors gather atop a sacred mountain, where Napi colors the floodwaters with various pigments and has the people drink from them. When they speak afterward, each group that drank a different color water speaks a different language. Only those who drank the black water share a common tongue, becoming the ancestors of the Blackfoot tribes. This symbolic myth offers a spiritual explanation for linguistic diversity, woven seamlessly into the broader flood narrative. Similarly, the Hopi people of the American Southwest tell of a flood that nearly drowned the world. In their story, some of the faithful are saved by ascending to the tops of high mountains, guided by spiritual beings. These tales reinforce a common structure: divine warning, the cleansing power of water, and the survival of a chosen few who carry forward the memory and lessons of the past. Further south in Mesoamerica, the Nahua people, whose descendants include the Aztecs, passed down a myth about successive worlds, each ruled by a different sun and culminating in cataclysmic endings. The fourth sun ended in a great flood brought forth by Calciutlicu, goddess of lakes and running waters, and wife of Tlaloc, the rain god. The heavens collapsed under the weight of the storm, and the then dominant race, the fish people, were swept away and transformed into the aquatic creatures that populate today's waters. In Maya tradition, preserved in the Popol Vuh, creation was also closely linked to flood imagery. After several failed attempts to create humans, including clay and wood figures, the gods finally punished the wooden men for their ignorance and lack of reverence. The gods sent a terrifying deluge that included black rain, wild animals, and even their own household items turning against them. Only monkeys remained as descendants of this failed generation, a mythic explanation for their human-like behavior. In both Nahua and Maya narratives, water doesn't just destroy, it resets. The flood is not simply retribution, but a prelude to a better creation. This cyclical concept of destruction and rebirth is fundamental in Mesoamerican cosmology, mirroring broader human patterns of myth. A world purged and restarted, often under divine guidance, as a means to correct or cleanse moral or spiritual failings. In the Andean region, the Incas and other pre-Columbian cultures held their own powerful flood legends. One notable myth speaks of Viracocha, the great creator deity, who fashioned giants to inhabit the world. These beings, however, became disobedient and failed to recognize him as their maker. Enraged by their defiance, Viracocha unleashed a massive flood to wipe them out. Only 2 survivors remained, Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, who would go on to found the Inca civilization. Another fascinating version appears in the Manuscrito de Huarochiri, a 17th-century Quechua text that documents pre-Hispanic beliefs. In this account, a llama warns its shepherd of an impending catastrophe, instructing him to take food and climb to the summit of Mount Huilcacoto. As foretold, the world was submerged beneath ocean waters, sparing only that peak. Animals crowded the mountaintop so tightly that the tip of the fox's tail dipped into the water, hence the fox's black-tipped tail. This story echoes not only other flood myths, but also the Hindu tale of Matsya and Manu, where divine warning, refuge on a mountain, and the survival of select beings form the core narrative. Ironically, the Manuscrito de Huarochiri was commissioned by a Spanish cleric, Francisco de Avila, whose goal was to eradicate local religions. While attempting to destroy the native spiritual tradition, he inadvertently preserved it for posterity, documenting myths that might otherwise have vanished forever. In present-day Colombia, the Muisca people tell of Chibchacum, a god associated with rain and thunder, who once grew angry at humanity's greed and selfishness. Tired of watching people fight over wealth, he sent thunder and lightning to the skies, scaring them into their homes. Then, as the storm raged on, the rain began to fall harder and harder until rivers overflowed and lakes spilled across the land. Floodwaters consumed the fertile highlands of Cundiboyacense, forcing people to flee to the tops of eastern mountains, where they watched helplessly as their homes and crops vanished beneath the deluge. Just as despair took hold, a figure appeared on the horizon. Bochica, a bearded, white-haired civilizing hero clothed in a simple tunic. He raised his golden staff to the sky, halting the storm in an instant. The clouds vanished, and Bochica descended to a great rock on a nearby hill. Striking it with his staff, he split the stone in 2, creating a massive gorge through which the waters rushed down into an abyss. The land was saved, and in the aftermath, a rainbow appeared in the sky. This event, mythologically, explains the creation of the Tequendama Falls, a stunning 150-meter-high waterfall in the region. The parallels with the Noah story are remarkable: divine punishment, a moral awakening, and the image of the rainbow as a symbol of renewal. But this tale also reflects a unique local cosmology that anchors the supernatural in real geography and living memory. As we continue southward, we reach the myths of the Mapuche and Chilote peoples in southern Chile. Their stories speak of 2 powerful serpentine beings, Tren Tren Vilu and Kai Kai Vilu. Born of ancient spirits, each was transformed into a serpent as a result of disobedience. Kai Kai, dwelling in the sea, grew furious with humanity's ingratitude despite all the gifts the ocean had provided. In her wrath, She struck the sea's surface with her tail, commanding the waters to rise and swallow the land. Mountains, valleys, and towns were drowned. Trentren, her land-dwelling counterpart, came to humanity's aid. Carrying people and animals on her back, she climbed to the highest peaks. Those she couldn't rescue in time were turned into birds, fish, or amphibious creatures, thus preserving their essence. Those who drowned became mythical beings known as Sampal, similar to mermaids and mermen. An epic battle ensued between the two serpents, shaking the earth and stirring the seas until both forces grew exhausted. Though Kekai failed to flood the entire land, neither did the waters return to their former level, explaining the fractured coastline of Chile. In a twist, later stories tell how Trentren herself became angered by humans, causing volcanoes to erupt and forcing migrations. Here again we find a familiar structure: divine beings, water as a tool of judgment, a chosen group of survivors, and the reshaping of the world as a result. It's another echo of a pattern that spans continents and centuries. From Africa to Oceania, the story continues. The Maasai of Kenya tell of Tumbainat, a righteous man warned by the god Ngai to build a vessel before a great flood wiped out humanity. Tumbainat, like Noah, preserved his family and animals. When the rains ended, he released a bird with a feathered arrow on its tail to determine if the waters had receded. Its return without the arrow signaled that land had re-emerged, and 4 rainbows graced the sky. In New Zealand, Maori tradition attributes a devastating flood to the prayers of 2 prophets angered by moral decay. They built a raft and saved only themselves. The deluge stopped only when they commanded it through prayer. On Easter Island, the Rapa Nui tell of a homeland called Hiva, submerged by rising seas, prompting a migration to the island. Whether caused by gods, cosmic imbalances, or natural cataclysms, the theme remains the same. Water, in its overwhelming power, acts as both destroyer and purifier. Archaeological and geological theories offer possible routes, like the Black Sea deluge, the melting of glaciers after the last ice age, or the Burkle crater tsunami, but none provide definitive answers. Perhaps the flood myth is more than history or science. Perhaps it's a reflection of a universal truth encoded in human memory, a story of rebirth, of resilience in the face of annihilation, and of the enduring human spirit. Across continents, across time, we keep telling the same tale. And in doing so, we remember who we are, where we've been, and what we hope never to forget. What do you think? Could all these flood myths be echoes of a shared human experience? Or are they simply different cultures arriving at similar ideas in isolation? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective helps us understand how these stories resonate with others around the world.